Hello, and welcome to Vidhammer, the battle report resource for Warhammer Fantasy. In this video, we'll be covering a second round matchup at the Phoenix Games Tournament in Orlando that was held in March of 2012. This is a 2,500 point engagement between the Dark Elf and Skaven armies using the 8th edition rules. As a special rule for this engagement, the 3 forests and 2 ruins on the board each contain a marker that symbolizes a keg of ale. Any core unit of an army that spends its entire turn on top of the keg can roll a 6-sided die, and on a 4, 5, or 6 will pick up the keg. Once obtained, the unit must test its leadership each turn to see if it succumbs to the brew and gets drunk, resulting in lower weapon skill but higher strength and toughness for the remainder of the game. Each army receives 1 point for each enemy unit destroyed, and 3 points for each keg of ale in possession at the conclusion of the match. For spell generation, the Skaven have a Warlock Engineer that gets Warp Lightning, a Plague Priest that gets Wither, and a Grey Seer that ends up with Scorch, Crack's Call, Blessed with Filth, and the dreaded 13th. The Dark Elves have a single level 2 Sorceress that gets Chill Wind and Word of Pain. The Dark Elves win the roll for board edge and choose to set up on the left half of the screen. The Dark Elves then make the first placement of 5 Dark Riders that go behind the lower ruins, and the Skaven follow with their war machines, consisting of 2 Warp Lightning Cannons and a Plague Claw Catapult. The Dark Elves follow with a unit of 5 Dark Riders on their far left flank, as the Skaven place a unit of 23 Plague Monks with a Plague Priest on the Plague Furnace. The Dark Elves place a unit of 22 warriors touching the central forest, and the Skaven respond with a unit of 40 Storm Vermin with an attached Poison Wind Mortar weapon team. Five more Dark Riders come down on the Dark Elves' right flank as the Skaven place 28 Clan Rats with another Poison Wind Mortar weapon team. The Dark Elves place their unit of 8 Cold One Riders with Malice Darkblade behind the hill, and the Skaven respond with a block of 59 Slaves. A Cold One Chariot comes down next to the Cold One Riders, and another unit of 28 Clan Rats with the Poison Wind Mortar comes down next to the Slaves. Another Cold One Chariot comes down next to the first, as the Skaven place their characters, consisting of a Warlord on a War Litter and a Chieftain BSB that go with the Storm Vermin, the Grey Seer that goes with the lower Clan Rats, and the Warlock Engineer who goes in the upper Clan Rats. The Dark Elves finish their placements with a War Hydra that goes next to the Cold One Knights, and a Highborn on a Black Dragon that starts behind the forest. After normal placements, the Dark Elves place a unit of 5 Shades that start off the lower right of the screen. At the start of the game, the Storm Vermin drink Skaven Brew, which gives them a Death Frenzy effect, granting them 2 additional attacks, and the unit takes d6 worth of wounds in each friendly compulsory movement phase. The Dark Elves win the starting roll and begin the game. They start by passing their checks for stupidity on their Cold One Chariots. They move up their line and make dice checks to pick up the brew kegs, but we didn't learn until afterwards that it was too early to take the checks. Luckily, none of them were picked up at this time. After Winds of Magic and Channeling, the Dark Elves end up with 11 power dice against 6 dispel dice. They use 5 dice to cast Chill Wind on the central Poison Wind Mortar weapon team. The Skaven used 5 dice to dispel but fail, and the spell takes out the weapon team. They used their remaining dice to cast Word of Pain on the Storm Vermin unit with Irresistible Force that kills off 3 warriors in the backlash. For shooting, the Shades target the Warp Lightning Cannon and hit for a single wound, and the lower Dark Riders hit it for 1 more. The central Dark Riders and 1 Chariot shoot for the central Poison Wind Mortar weapon team and hit for 1 wound, but it gets saved. The other Chariot and upper Dark Riders shoot for the uppermost weapon team, but fail to wound as well. The Skaven move their slave unit forward as their only movement. In the magic phase, Winds of Fate and Channeling give the Skaven 7 power dice, against 5 Dispel dice. They use 2 dice to attempt Warp Lightning, but it gets dispelled. Next, they use 3 dice to cast Crack's Call, but it gets dispelled with a scroll. They use their last 2 dice to cast Scorch on the Central Warrior unit with Irresistible Force and take out 9 models. The unit passes its panic check, and the miscast sucks the Grey Seer into the void, and kills off 13 clan rats who fail their leadership check and run. In the shooting phase, the Plague Claw catapult misfires and the shot drifts back on the slaves for 3 wounds, but they pass their panic check. The first Poison Wind mortar shoots for the Cold One Knights and misfires, but doesn't drift far enough to hurt anything. The second mortar also misfires, but again doesn't hurt anything. The first Warp Lightning cannon shoots for the dragon and rider and puts a single wound on the dragon. The second cannon shoots for the dragon, but the shot sticks into the mud. Finally, the Warlock Engineer caps off his Doom Rocket and hits the Cold One Knights for 3 wounds. At the end of the turn, the upper clan rats attempt to pick up the ale keg, but fail. On the second turn, the upper Cold One chariot fails its stupidity test and moves forward d6 inches. As a late realization, the Storm Vermin suffer 2 wounds from their Skaven brew effect. The Shades charge the Warp Lightning Cannon, and the Black Dragon and Cold One Riders charge the Storm Vermin, but the Cold One Riders fail the charge. After reviewing the recording, the Dark Elf player added his flying movement of 10 inches to his charge roll, but any unit that charges must use their ground movement when determining charge ranges, so the Black Dragon should have failed this charge. The War Hydra charges the slave unit, but fails and moves 3 inches. For normal movement, the lower Dark Riders move into the lower forest, and the chariots move forward. The upper Dark Riders check the ruins, but fail to get the ale keg. Winds of Magic and Channeling gives the Dark Elves 6 power dice against 6 Dispel dice. They use 2 dice to attempt Power of Darkness, but it gets dispelled. They use their remaining dice to cast Power of Darkness on the Storm Vermin, but it gets dispelled with a scroll. For shooting, the lower and central Dark Riders shoot for the Plague Furnace but are unable to wound, while the Chariot and upper Dark Riders take out the upper Poison Wind Mortar weapon team. In close combat, the Warlord makes way, but no challenges are issued. The Dreadlord puts 2 wounds on the Warlord. The Warlord and Warlitter strike back at the Dreadlord, who has a 2+ armor save and an inverse ward save, and are unable to wound. The remaining Storm Vermin strike at the Dragon for a single wound that gets saved. The Dragon takes out the Warlord and uses its breath weapon to take out 4 Storm Vermin. Finally, the Thunderstomp takes out 3 more Storm Vermin, who lose the battle but remain steadfast and pass their break check. In the lower combat, the Shades put 2 wounds on the Warp Lightning Cannon, killing it off, and overrunning into the fleeing clan rats, killing them off, and the Shades get an additional reform to square up to the catapult. On the Skaven turn, the slaves declare a charge against the Cold One Knights. They then start doing their normal movement, moving the Plague Monks forward 5 inches. Then they remember to roll the charge distance and the slaves make the charge. The upper clan rats pick up the ale keg from the forest and pass their leadership to avoid getting drunk. In the magic phase, the Skaven get 8 power dice against 4 dispel dice. They use 4 dice to cast Wither on the lower Dark Riders to lower their toughness by 1. They get Irresistible Force, and the resultant backlash hits all models in base contact with the caster, who shares a base with the Plague Furnace, so 8 models die and the remaining dice are lost. For shooting, the Plague Catapult shoots for the lower Dark Riders but drifts off. The central Poison Wind Mortar shoots off to the side of the dragon, hoping for a fortuitous drift, but it misfires and the mortar blows up, taking out 3 more Storm Vermin. The Warp Lightning Cannon shoots for the Cold One Knights and takes out a single model. In the dragon close combat, the Dreadlord takes out a single storm vermin, who strikes at the dragon for 2 wounds, who in turn hits the storm vermin for 6 more. The storm vermin lose the combat and fail their break test, while someone decides to stand right in front of the camera. The dragon overruns into the Plague Claw catapult. In the slave combat, Malice Darkblade does 3 wounds. The slaves do a single wound, but it gets saved. Finally, the mount does an additional wound. The slaves tie the combat with help from a musician and stay alive a little while longer. On the 3rd turn, the chariots pass their stupidity checks. The 2 chariots charge the upper clan rats, but only one makes it. The War Hydra charges the slaves, and Malice drinks his happy potion, giving him higher stats for the rest of the game. The upper Dark Riders pick up an ale keg. The Central Warriors, Lower Warriors, and Lower Dark Riders try as well, but fail. The Shades turn towards the Plague Furnace as the Central Dark Riders ride around the Plague Monk's flank. Winds of Magic gives the Dark Elves 7 power dice against 5 dispel dice. They use 4 dice to cast Doombolt on the Plague Furnace, but it gets dispelled. As a late action, the Central Dark Elf warriors lose a model to the forest attacks, and the unit ends up being out of the forest. For shooting, the Lower and Central Dark Riders and the Shades put 1 wound on the Plague Furnace and 1 on the Grey Seer. The upper Dark Riders shoot for the Warp Lightning Cannon, but fail to wound. In the Dragon combat, the Plague Claw catapult gets destroyed and the dragon overruns off of the table. In the upper combat, the Cold One chariot hits for 2 impact wounds. The 2 riders aim for the Warlock Engineer and do a single wound, and everything else misses. The Clan Rats win the tiebreaker for the combat, but the chariot passes its break test. In the slave combat, Malice does 3 wounds, Spite does 1 wound, the Hydra does 2 more, and the Handlers do 5 more. The slaves do a single wound that gets saved. They then lose 4 more to a Thunderstomp. The slaves fail their break test and explode, taking out 1 Cold One Knight. The Skaven charge the lower warriors with their Plague Monks, but fail, moving 4 inches. Winds of Magic gives the Skaven 9 power dice against 6 dispel dice. They use 6 dice to attempt Wither as their only spell, but it gets dispelled with dice. For shooting, the Warp Lightning Cannon shoots for the Central Chariot, but fails to wound. In the only combat, the Chariot Riders kill off the Warlock Engineer. The Clan Rats hit for a single wound that gets saved, and another Clan Rat is lost to the beast. The Clan Rats win the combat by 2, and the chariot passes its break test. On the 4th turn, Malice kills off a Cold One Knight in his rage. The Cold One Knights move on top of the hill. The Central Warriors step back into the forest. The War Hydra turns south, and the upper Dark Riders move in, while the lower warriors finally pick up the ale keg in the southern ruin. The dragon moves back on the board and moves toward the Warp Lightning Cannon. Winds of Magic gives the Dark Elves 5 power dice against 3 dispel dice. They use 2 dice to cast Chill Wind on the Plague Furnace, but it gets dispelled with dice. They use their remaining dice to cast Word of Pain on the Plague Furnace. For shooting, the chariot shoots for the Warp Lightning Cannon but fails to wound. The Central Dark Riders and the Shades shoot for the Plague Furnace and take out the Furnace and the Plague Priest, while the lower Dark Riders take out a single Plague Monk. In combat, the chariot takes out another Clan Rat and loses the combat, failing its break test and running 11 inches with the Clan Rats pursuing 8. On the Skaven turn, the Clan Rats charge the chariot, which continues to flee. The Clan Rats fail the distance and move forward alongside the other chariot. The Plague Monks make their charge against the lower warriors as their only other movement. The Skaven don't have any remaining casters and move into the shooting phase. The Warp Lightning Cannon shoots for the dragon, but the shot sticks into the ground. In the only combat, the Spearmen hit first and get 3 wounds. The Plague Monks use their Plague Banner and get 10 wounds, with 4 getting saved. The Plague Monks win the combat, but the Dark Elves remain steadfast and pass their leadership test. In the 5th turn, the War Hydra and Malice charge the Plague Monks while the Dragon charges the cannon. The Central Warriors and Lower Right Dark Riders both find the ale kegs. The lower warriors succumb to the ale and get drunk. The Dark Elves get double 6s for Winds of Magic and use 6 dice to cast Chill Wind on the Plague Monks with irresistible force. The Backlash takes out 4 Dark Warriors and sucks the Sorceress into the void, with the unit passing its panic check. In the upper combat, the Dragon takes out the Warp Lightning Cannon. In the lower combat, Malice takes out 2 Plague Monks, 3 more die to the Warriors, and 4 more to the Hydra Handlers. The Plague Monks take out 2 Spearman Warriors, but don't put any wounds on Malice or the Hydra. The Hydra adds 2 more wounds as well. The monks lose the combat and fail their break test, running 10 inches. On the Skaven turn, the monks fail to rally and run into the forest and lose another model. The clan rats charge the upper chariot, which flees, but the rats make the charge distance. With no magic, shooting, or combat, the game comes to a close, with the Dark Elves taking a marked victory, having captured 4 ale kegs to 1 and eliminating several enemy units. Thanks for watching this battle report. Be sure and check back for more videos each week. Do us a favor and subscribe, and as always, send us a message if you have any tactics or matchups that you'd like to see. Till next time from the Vidhammer crew, keep fighting.